Okay, so let's pop in here to this is like part two of Lessoncast one. So the first Lessoncast, I just went over some basic procedural stuff about like how to do notes and like how to do your heading and that kind of stuff. This one, we're going to more specifically start looking at the deeper things that we're going to be jumping into this year and what this year is going to entail for you. So the term meta theme is just it's a way to look at the like overall big picture that the year is going to bring to you. There is going to be a big picture to the whole year that we're going to keep coming back to certain points over and over again. And that's kind of what I want to go over right now. Okay. So to begin with, let's look at what it means to think like a historian. So there's six basic ideas to keep in mind here. Now, and if you look at the back of the room behind on the back wall, you will see that I have these very six posters up in the back, minus the light bulbs. I do have the light bulbs somewhere, I just didn't put them up. So, thinking like a historian, right? In no particular order, these are six important things to keep in mind. Number one is the issue of contextualization or context. You need to know what was going on, time and place, both the time area and the environment that people lived in order to make an informed choice or judgment. It's really easy to jump to conclusions that, you know, people um, were stupid or ignorant because they lived 200 years before us or even farther back. And how could they do such things or how could they believe such things that they do? And it's because of what was there at the time. And if you don't look at people and circumstances based on the time that they were living and the framework of the world that they were in, you really can't make an informed choice or opinion about them. Which leads us to the idea of developing an argument. If you are going to make a claim, have facts and evidence to back it up. Okay? Don't just throw out your opinion without anything to back that opinion up. And just because you feel something is a certain way, I don't feel that that was personally right. Lovely, but your feelings do not justify an argument because they're personal to you and they will not apply to other people. Factual information that can statistically and logically back up a statement you are making is really what we're looking at when we're talking about developing an argument. A lot of you can argue, developing it is the problem. Continuity and change over time. Things evolve and change constantly. Okay. And you need to understand that over time, things have developed. Language is a great example of this. Um, the way that people spoke 200 years ago is very different than they do now. And you need to appreciate that there's a continued tradition, that there's a continued spectrum of ideas, there's a continued basis for things. But there have been changes that have occurred over time. Technology has changed, the world around us has changed, the physical environment's changed. And you need to keep these things in mind in order to make, or to understand, I should say, better what it is we're talking about. Comparisons. How are things alike? How are things different? Um, it's important to know facts. It's important to understand context. It's important to understand how things have changed when you are comparing them. It, you can compare cryptocurrency like Bitcoin to fractional reserve currency, which is what we currently have in the United States. How are they alike? How are they different? Why did both of them develop? Okay, you need to be able to sort of compare, to say how they're similar and how they're different, comparing and contrasting. Analyzing historical evidence. There are two things you can look at: primary sources and secondary sources. Primary sources are things that were actually there at the time. Okay. And a secondary source is simply something telling you about what was going on. A textbook is a secondary source, unless the textbook is really old and you're looking at it to see what people thought and how they thought and why they taught that way. Then the textbook becomes a primary source. It's always important to go back to the original source for something and not use somebody else's copy or version of it. So, a great example of this is in foreign languages like Latin and Greek. There are multiple words that we translate out into English as one thing. So I could say, I love pizza. I love my kids. I love my wife. I love rock and roll. Um, I love a challenge. It's the same English word love, but it doesn't mean the same thing. You, if you simply look at the translation, you may lose the context and what was trying to be achieved with the document, or with anything like that. You have to look at, understand, and go back to the original source if possible, and not just rely on somebody else telling you it. Okay. Now, sometimes when you're looking at foreign documents, unless you speak that language, it's really hard. But for the most part, we're going to try to look at the actual information, what was told by the people at the time or what was available to them at the time. And last but not least, causation. Some people would argue that the best reason to study history, if not the only reason, is to understand how, thing A causes result B to happen. And that after a while, you can begin to recognize patterns, and that these patterns indicate what outcomes will result from a specific event or set of circumstances. We're going to talk a little bit more about this idea tomorrow when we get into the idea of the economic analysis of history, with the idea that there are predictable outcomes that you can sort of achieve. And that's what causation is, the idea that thing A results in thing B. So, 6 arguments to think like a historian. Understand what these are and be able to briefly summarize them if I ask you. Okay, peace and love. Peace and love.